Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Bill, how you doing?
Never been this happy. How about you?
I have never been this curious. Today, Bill, we know from experience in talking with our colleagues, our friends, our coworkers, that one barrier people have in finding good mentors is being a little shy or intimidated to ask for the help. And so we thought we'd talk about that, figure out how to approach that in this episode. And, originally we thought this could be a really short discussion because both you and I thought, well, you just need to get over it. Go ask.
It's hard to imagine you being all that shy about all this stuff.
But we wanted to give a little more substance and something that might be a little bit more compassionate to offer some actionable advice to folks.
Sure, and to be honest, you certainly could make the choice of not getting mentorship. You could decide that being uncomfortable and asking for the support outweighs the benefits of getting the support. And so all you need to know is we disagree with you. The support you get from mentoring outweighs the initial discomfort. I acknowledge it's a choice you can make. We just wouldn't recommend that choice.
We do not recommend that choice. And so the big question is, how do I get over being shy about asking for a mentor? Bill, what do you think?
Well, so first, start off by saying, yes, of course we acknowledge that, this could be intimidating. If you have those kinds of thoughts, you're not alone. You're certainly not the Lone Ranger to say, geez, I don't know if I don't have the wherewithal to go ask somebody senior for this kind of help. It's very, very common to be feeling this way because it mixes vulnerability and fear of rejection along with the worry that you're just bothering somebody senior. And so, it's really that the vulnerability is that you're admitting you don't have all the answers or that you need help. Okay, I get that. And your fear of rejection, what if somebody says no to me? Is it a reflection that they don't see that I have potential for the job that I want? And what about bothering somebody? Well, leaders are busy and the last thing I want to do is feel like I'm a gnat or I'm an annoyance. So I would say that there's a couple of ways you can think about that to make it easier, both emotionally and practically. And I would start by reframing what asking really means. So most people you would approach were mentored themselves. If you're talking to somebody senior, there's a very high probability that they've experienced being mentored themselves earlier in their career and perhaps right now. And they usually expect to help others as part of their own growth. Many leaders actually want to give back, especially the people who are showing genuine desire for their growth in their own careers. So you just got to shift your thinking from I'm asking for some big favor to perhaps I'm offering somebody a chance to share their experience, something most professionals actually like doing. And this alone would help reduce the feeling of burdening them.
Yeah, you're not a burden, right? And so one way to also reframe it is maybe don't ask for that big word mentorship at the start. That often feels big and formal to ask for, will you be my mentor? Instead, the person can really start small. Like, can I get your thoughts on something I'm working on? Or would you be open to a short conversation about your experience with and name a challenge that you're dealing with right now? Because often mentorship grows naturally out of one good conversation rather than some big dramatic ask. So this thought builds on something we've talked about previously. That is, some of the most successful mentoring relationships are grown organically between two people rather than being the result of any formalized mentor matchmaking.
Yeah, clearly when we got started, there was no formalized program that nobody did some sort of e-harmony for you guys should be mentor and mentee. We just sort of worked it out with general conversations about where work needed to go, and it developed very organically between the two of us for that relationship that I think continued fairly well and for a good long time.
Yeah,
So
and
go
actually
ahead. I'm
adding
sorry.
on that, Bill, I mean, what I remember about the beginning of our mentoring conversations was also because of the role that I had in the organization was as a liaison between our, one organization and another. And so a lot of our conversations in the beginning were just like, what do you think? What do you think about how we should handle this? And in kind of more bigger organizational questions. And that actually developed into me asking you questions about career and asking, what do you think I should do next? And you actually opening some doors for what I was going to do in my next role. That's how I remember it really organically developing.
Right, and so that's a pretty good summary. And just to your earlier point, could I get your thoughts on something I'm working on was sort of how it started, and then evolved into a much more broad discussion about your career and where you're trying to get to. So, yeah, I think those comments really resonate for me. So, when you're trying to reach out to somebody, the specific request like that feels much easier for both sides, frankly. If you said, I need some help being mentored for where I'm going in my career as your opening question, that's a little bit more difficult than, hey, we're working on these two problems together. Could I get your input on how this is going and where you think we need to go? So not can you mentor me, but gee, I like how you handled some specific thing at work. Could I ask you a couple of questions about how you approach that? I'm working on improving in some skill area, and I'd really value your perspective. Could we talk for 15 minutes sometime this month? So very, very specific, much smaller, and certainly much less imposing for both people. So, after that, as we've mentioned before, you follow up with them with whatever you tried. If you got some advice from them, it shows you valued their opinion, their advice, and it gives much more opportunity for a follow-on discussion.
How you were just talking about it also just reminds me too that it's also really helpful to almost prepare a little script, right? It helps reduce anxiety if when you have somebody that you know that you admire and that you want to get their perspective on something or their mentorship on something, reduce your own anxiety in approaching them by preparing a small script. So something like, hey, Bill, I really admire how you handled whatever situation it was. I'm working on improving in that area and wondered if you'd be open to a brief conversation about your experience. No pressure, even 15 minutes would mean a lot to me. Have this in your back pocket, and that takes away most of the freeze that might happen if you're in a situation where you can reach out and talk to this person that you would like to be your mentor. Good preparation really can help smooth the first interaction. The first thing really to do is think about what you are hoping to get out of this mentorship. That will help you come up with some relevant questions to ask. Like, you can write them down ahead of time so that your mind doesn't go blank when it comes time to meet. It's okay if you don't get through them all. It leaves space for conversation instead of just going down a list. In fact, it's likely better if you both recognize there's more to talk about that would draw both of you into additional conversations. And it's also a good idea to work on your elevator pitch as a way of introducing yourself at the outset. What is your 30-second summary of your background and how you found yourself on your career interest path?
Yeah, one of the best examples that I ever saw of that, and we talked about this briefly in a previous cast, was a waiter at a restaurant talking to me, and all just like I say it at the beginning of each one of these podcasts. He said, "How are you guys doing tonight?" I said, "I've never been this happy," and he immediately jumped in and said, "How do you get to that place?" And had an elevator speech that he clearly had in his mind about where he is in his career and what he's trying to accomplish and where he wants to go. And so it was beautifully done, and it engendered a 10 or 15 minute conversation a mentoring conversation right there in the restaurant where he was just coming to bring us drinks, and here we are having a mentoring conversation inside about 2 seconds after he comes in. So he had his elevator speech about where he is and where he wants to go, and so it turned out to be a terrific opening. And so when you're thinking about those things and you're trying to think about what that speech looked like, you can include questions like, so how did you know when you were ready for the next step in your career when you're approaching your mentor? Have you ever faced the imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you manage it? And the truth of the matter is, most people who are new in their careers would be very surprised how many seasoned professionals have gone through imposter syndrome.
And still do.
And still do, many of us. Another classic question I think really is very effective for opening up greater conversation. If you could go back in time to give advice to yourself when you were first starting your career, what advice would you give? That's just a phenomenally good question for people, and it's thought provoking. What's the most important stuff you'd like to tell yourself? If you were going back X number of years to your younger self, just getting started.
Yeah, it's interesting because it doesn't even have to be necessarily like when you first start your career. It reminds me of a conversation that I had. Actually, my aunt retired as a senior vice president of a very large company, and had really had to climb her way from being an admin in order to get there. And in the beginning of her career, she really started out just as a data entry kind of person, and then moved up to be senior vice president by the time she retired. And I was 40 when I asked her, what would you tell your 40-year-old self? So this wasn't early in my career. This was, me asking middle of my career some perspective that she might give to me and what she would recommend from her 40-year-old self. Because at that time, I had a young kid. She had young children when she was 40. What would she do? And her advice, actually, it was not only work related, but it was actually very much personal health related. She said, keep moving, keep working out, work as much as you can because you're in a chair all day long. And she said, I can tell you my hips and my wrists really wish that I would have kept working out. And so that I felt like was really good advice because especially at that stage in my career, I was very much entrenched in long hours and making sure I could, impact the roles that I was in as well as I could. And I had not been as diligent as I wanted to be at focusing on my health. So that I think was actually a really good advice that when I thought about it, like it wasn't just like, tell me about your early career, but rather, hey, I'm 40. What would you tell your 40-year-old self? What do you wish you would have, your 40-year-old self would have done? Or what were you glad your 40-year-old self did do? And so I really appreciated that advice. It's another question that you could ask a mentor is something about trends that they're seeing in their career space. Like what trends are you seeing in IT, in AI, in whatever, construction, whatever your career space is, and how do you keep up with the latest ones? That's actually a really good question to reach out to mentors to ask as well.
Absolutely. So, all right. So now we've put some time into what kind of questions, how do I open up the conversation? Okay, now comes the part where people probably are most worried about the rejection piece. And so what kind of responses should I expect when I ask questions of my mentors, trying to get that time from them? There's sort of a range of responses that people should expect. And, it's not just necessarily yes or no. And certainly a no isn't usually a rejection. It's almost always about time that people have or don't have. And so most of the senior folks are going to reply with something like, well, I'm really busy, but here are some resources you could use. Or I can't meet regularly, but I'd be happy to talk once. Or maybe let's revisit this in a couple of months. Or let me introduce you to Joe or Mary who might have some help for you. So if you start expecting that your responses might be somewhere in the middle between yes and no, It stops feeling that like any of those responses are some sort of a personal judgment about whether or not you're worth the time. Just accept the fact that that's how the seniors are probably going to respond, because there's lots and lots of range for what expectations they might be able to meet and how much time they might have on their calendar right when you happen to be asking the questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Another idea too is just to practice asking with a low stakes person. Instead of going straight to the most senior person that you can think of that you admire and would like to be your mentor, well, maybe reach out to somebody that you feel mostly comfortable with first and talk to them and leverage those same questions that you would ask that more senior person with that person you're feeling more comfortable with. And that really helps get you more comfortable with the process and with asking questions, asking the right questions, and really engaging in a good conversation. After one positive experience, reaching out to somebody more senior becomes much easier. And one way also to think about it is also talk to your colleagues. Who has been helpful to them? Whose advice do they seek? And how did they successfully reach out to those more senior folks? That can really lower the barrier that some feel in asking for mentoring.
Okay, so now we've gotten to the point where we're okay with getting to ask the questions, but where do you go so that you can get to that conversation? And so I would suggest one of the easiest ways to do that is just before or just after meetings that you're going to be attending with that person. And I had lots and lots of experience with this when I was the senior guy in the room. Many people would be waiting outside the door just before the meeting or would follow me out the door right after the meeting so they could start to ask a few questions to say, hey, could I get a little bit of your time to go over this challenge that I'm having? A more casual time might be if there's an awards ceremony where there's sort of there's a time afterwards when everybody gets together to meet with all the awardees. Those kinds of ceremonies often have time built into them for conversations with the crowd. And so those are easy places to get with people. Same thing goes for conferences, which are intended as networking opportunities. And so take advantage of those things. Reach out to the folks. Ideally, perhaps reach out to them via some of the chat opportunities that happen with most of these big meetings, and let them know that you'd like to get a minute of their time to sort of offer up this question, this sort of burning question about how you'd like some help for your career. And I guess the last and probably least desirable version is email. I think everybody on the planet is about done with email these days, even though we use it all the time. It is not the healthiest or easiest way to get people's attention. So that's, to me, that's the last ditch effort if there's just no other way you can get to them. I think the earlier suggestions are going to be much stronger than email. But in any case, find an excuse to be someplace with them when you can start that conversation.
Yeah. So wrapping up, we started this out by saying people just need to get over it. Having a mentor is so much better for your career than not. And it's a choice you make if you don't want to go down that path. But we also gave some practical tips on, if you are shy, how to get over that shyness. And it's one thing to identify good mentors and people you'd like to connect with and ask for their advice. But then once you do identify those folks, you have to make the move. It's not going to happen magically. Start small. Ask someone you admire for a short conversation. Nothing formal or documented other than the notes that maybe you'll take from the conversation. If the short conversation goes well, use it as a stepping off point to grow something longer term. You have the responsibility and control over your own career, your own growth, and your own life. So choose to make it better.
Couldn't have said it better. That's a terrific summary. So thanks very much for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share it with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.